She bolted through the back corridor with her heels half slipping off, one hand clutching her bag to her chest and the other pushing against the wall to keep herself upright. Behind her, angry voices rose fast. "Stop her! Get the phone! Don't let her leave with that file!" Her breath tore in and out of her lungs as she turned a corner too sharply, her shoulder smashing into a service door. Pain shot down her arm, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If they caught her now, everything would be over. "I did nothing wrong," she whispered to herself, but her voice shook. She was not built like the women people expected to be fearless. She was curvy, full-bodied, soft in ways men always noticed only long enough to judge. She had learned long ago how to wear her beauty like armor, but armor did not stop humiliation. Armor did not stop whispers. Armor did not stop the kind of laughter that followed her when people assumed her size made her slow, weak, or careless. Still, tonight was different. Tonight she had proof. Tonight she had the kind of evidence that could destroy a man who had spent years hiding behind money, favors, and fear. She reached the kitchen exit, shoved it open, and burst into the cold night air. The city hit her all at once. Bright lights, honking cars, the smell of rain-soaked pavement, and the heavy pulse of danger hanging over the street. She stumbled forward, almost losing her footing, but then she saw the black van waiting at the curb. For 1 second, her heart dropped. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." The side door slid open. A man stepped out, tall, broad, silent. His black coat was open just enough to show the outline of the tattoos crawling up his neck and disappearing under his collar. His face was clean and cold, sharp enough to seem carved from stone. His eyes found her instantly, steady and unreadable. "Lena Park?" he asked in a deep voice. She froze. Her first thought was that she had made a terrible mistake. Her second thought was that she was already dead. Then she noticed something else. The men chasing her had stopped at the kitchen door. They were not rushing toward her anymore. They were backing away. One of them whispered, "That's him." The man by the van didn't move. He just kept looking at her like he was deciding whether she was a threat or a problem. Lena's pulse slammed in her ears. "Who are you?" His gaze dropped to the envelope in her hand. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." She swallowed hard. "It belongs to the people who were being cheated." A flicker moved through his face, not surprise, interest. Behind her, the kitchen door slammed open again. Voices grew louder. "Hand her over!" The tattooed stranger finally turned his head, and the air around him seemed to change. Not because he shouted. Not because he moved fast. He simply looked in their direction with such controlled threat that the men at the door stopped dead. Then he spoke again, calm and flat. "Go back inside." No one answered. One of the men tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. "This is not your business." The stranger tilted his head slightly. "It is now." Lena stared at him, stunned. She had no idea who he was, but the fear in the other men's faces told her enough. These were not ordinary employees. These were men who had been chasing her with real intent to hurt her. And now they looked like boys who had just seen a storm arrive. One of them forced himself to speak. "Mr. Han," the stranger's eyes narrowed. The man swallowed the rest of his sentence. Lena looked from one face to the next, confusion rising through her panic. Mr. Han, so that was who he was. She had heard the name before in ugly rumors whispered through the city's darker corners. Kim Han Joon, a Korean mafia boss with a reputation for being impossible to bribe, impossible to fool, and impossible to survive once crossed. The thought should have terrified her more. Instead, what she felt was something stranger, relief. Because if these men feared him, then maybe she had one chance to live. She took a breath and stepped closer to him. "I don't know what you want, but I'm not going back in there." His eyes stayed on her face. "You think I'm here for you? That would be comforting," she snapped, and the fear in her voice made the words sharper than intended. One of his men appeared from the van and said something quickly in Korean. Kim Han Joon responded without looking away from her. The exchange was short, clipped, efficient. Then he extended one hand. "Give me the envelope." Lena tightened her grip. "Why should I? Because if you keep it, they'll kill you before sunrise." The simple way he said it made her stomach turn. She stared at him for a second longer, then slowly handed it over. He did not open it right away. Instead, he glanced at her bruised wrist, then at the smear of dust on her cheek, then at the way she was holding herself upright like a person pretending not to be afraid. "You ran from them alone?" he asked. "I wasn't waiting for help." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. That was a mistake. She almost laughed from exhaustion. You're full of comforting words. One corner of his mouth moved, barely enough to count as a smile. You are still standing. That means you have not made the worst mistake yet. Before she could answer, a gunshot cracked through the air. The sound exploded behind them. Lena jerked with a gasp. Kim Han Joon moved instantly, stepping between her and the street as his men rushed into position. Another shot rang out, then another, and somewhere in the chaos someone screamed. The alley was suddenly alive with shouting, footsteps, the violent slam of doors. He grabbed her arm. Get in the van. I'm not. Now. Something in his voice made resistance impossible. She climbed into the back just as his men fired back toward the shadows near the road. The door slammed shut, sealing her inside a space that smelled like leather, steel, and expensive cologne. Her whole body shook. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to breathe. Outside, the van rocked slightly from the force of movement. Kim Han Joon entered a second later, shutting the door behind him. Blood was visible on one of his men's sleeves, but the man stood still and silent as if pain had no permission to matter. Kim Han Joon sat opposite her and pulled the envelope apart. Lena watched him, too stunned to speak. He skimmed the contents. The more he read, the darker his face became. Then he looked up. Where did you get this? She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. From the office above the club. Who gave it to you? No one gave it to me. Her voice trembled again, but she forced herself to keep going. I found it after I was sent upstairs to clean the executive room. They thought I was invisible. His gaze stayed fixed on her. She hated that gaze a little. It made her feel measured, Wade assessed. Too many people had looked at her like that before and decided she was too much woman for their taste, too soft, too large, too easy to dismiss. But this man didn't look like he was judging her body. He looked like he was trying to understand how someone like her had walked into danger and come out with a secret in her hand. Kim Han Joon finally said, You stole from a man who would have burned this district to the ground to get it back. I didn't steal it, she shot back. I exposed him. A pause. Then he said, That was brave. She blinked. No one had called her brave tonight, not in a way that sounded real, not in a way that didn't immediately turn into pity or a joke. Her eyes stung, and she hated that even more. She turned away before he could see it. Outside, the van started moving. The city lights slid across the windows in long streaks of white and gold. Lena could hear her heart beat louder than the engine. She kept waiting for someone to tell her this was a mistake, that she had been dragged into the wrong vehicle, the wrong war, the wrong man's attention. But Kim Han Joon remained quiet, reading the papers in his hands with cold concentration. At last she said, So what now? He looked at her slowly. Now I decide whether you are useful. The bluntness of it should have offended her. Instead, it calmed her. Useful meant alive. Useful meant there was a reason she had not been thrown out yet. She crossed her arms, trying to steady herself. And if I'm not, then you go back where you came from, which is exactly where they'll kill me. His eyes lifted to hers. Yes, the honesty of it made her stomach tighten. He was not pretending to be kind. He was not offering safety like some savior out of a storybook. He was simply stating the world as it was, and somehow that made him easier to trust than men who smiled too much. Lena exhaled shakily. You're not exactly a gentleman. Good, she frowned. Good, I am not interested in being liked. That made her laugh once, short and disbelieving, despite the terror still clinging to her skin. That I believe. His gaze lingered on her for a second longer than necessary. Then he returned to the documents. What's on those papers? She asked. Names, transfers, laundered money. A chain of lies large enough to bury several people. She hesitated. Including you? He did not answer immediately. That silence told her more than words could have. It told her he lived in a world where betrayal was normal, where trust was a liability, where power was built on secrets and violence and the ability to destroy others before they destroyed you. Lena's pulse slowed just enough for her to think. Maybe that was why he noticed her. Not because she was weak. Because she had done the one thing weak people rarely survived. She had walked out carrying evidence against monsters. The van turned sharply. Her shoulder brushed the seat and she winced. Kim Han Joon noticed. You're injured. I'm fine. You're lying. Do you always talk like that? Only when necessary. She shook her head, but the tension in her chest loosened by a fraction. And what's unnecessary? He folded the papers once. Anything that wastes time. That should have ended the conversation. It did not. Because Lena had been underestimated for too long to stop asking questions now. Why did you help me? His answer came after a pause long enough to make her nervous. Because they were afraid of me. She stared at him. He continued, voice low and steady. And if they were afraid enough to retreat, then they believed you mattered. The words hit her harder than expected. No one had ever said she mattered like it was a fact. Her throat tightened. She looked away fast, angry at herself for nearly breaking in front of a stranger. A dangerous stranger, yes, but still a stranger. Yet in the reflection of the window, she could see her own face, wide-eyed, tired, bruised, but still beautiful, still there, still refusing to disappear. The van slowed, her head lifted. Where are we going? Kim Han Joon slid the envelope into his coat. Somewhere you can breathe. That sounds suspicious. It should. She almost smiled again, but before she could answer, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen and all softness left his expression. What is it? She asked. He did not answer right away. Then he said one word and it sounded like a warning. They found us. The van jerked as the driver swerved hard. Lena's whole body went cold. Through the rear window, headlights surged behind them, too many, too close, moving with purpose. Black vehicles emerged from the night one after another like predators catching a trail. Kim Han Joon's jaw tightened. He looked at her once, and in that look there was no judgment, no pity, no distance. Only a cold understanding that whatever came next, she was already inside it. Stay down, he said. Her hands clenched. I'm not hiding. His eyes flashed briefly toward hers. Then don't freeze. The first impact hit the back of the van so hard she lurched sideways against the seat. A second later, glass shattered somewhere behind them. His men shouted in Korean. The driver cursed. The world became movement, sound, and fear colliding at once. Lena grabbed the seat with both hands, heart pounding so hard it hurt. And then, through all the chaos, Kim Han Joon did something that made her breath catch. He reached across the narrow space, caught her wrist, and held it firmly. Not to control her, to steady her. His grip was warm and unshaking. You're with me now, he said. And for the first time in a long time, Lena believed that might mean survival. The van skidded into a narrow underground garage that smelled of oil and metal. The clatter of pursuit faded behind the heavy steel door like teeth chewing through sound. Lena's entire body thrummed with adrenaline so fierce she could feel it under her skin. Men moved with quiet efficiency around them, checking doors, scanning the shadowed corners. Kim Han Joon's world had a rhythm she did not yet understand. Violence and order braided together into a dangerous kind of choreography. They led her into a room lit by a single lamp that made the air look thin and metallic. A chair waited, not a throne but practical, with straps she could see for a fraction of a second before one of the men waved them away. Lena kept her eyes on everything and nothing, cataloging exits, faces, the cut of a jacket, the way the men's hands rested near their hips, habits that spoke of training. You'll be safe here for now, Kim Han Joon told her, but his voice had the distance of someone who guarded his words like currency. We need to know who's after you and how much of what you took is known. She swallowed and felt the dry taste of copper in her mouth. It was a file, names, accounts, transfers. He was stealing from the community. Her voice broke. She folded her hands in her lap, not wanting to repeat the shame that came with telling the story aloud. I should have handed it to the police. And yet you ran, he observed. Because the police in that district don't act without pressure, she said. Because the men upstairs control the deals that keep the officers fed. Because I didn't trust anyone to keep me safe when they found out. He watched her with a patience that might have been pity if it had softened his features. It didn't. It was only assessment. What was their name? She gave it. He nodded once as if confirming something already expected. Outside, muffled voices spoke in low Korean. The language felt like rainfall, direct and unyielding. Lena had learned snatches of Korean from the neighborhoods she frequented, phrases like thank you, stop, how much, but not enough to follow plans laid in that cadence. One of the men unfastened the straps on the chair and helped her up. You need to rest, he said in halting English. His eyes were kind, offsetting the hardness carved into his face. Rest. The word felt foreign and dangerous, an indulgence she had not earned. I can't sleep, she said instead. What happens to the people who were depending on me? The families who sent their money and trusted him. Kim Han Joon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. For a moment, the grotesque rumor around his name, the shadows that clung to him like a second skin, softened into something human and sharp at the same time. We'll make sure the money gets back, he promised. You promise, she echoed, savoring the unlikely sound. Promises from men with power were currency, sometimes worthless, sometimes lethal. She had long since learned to measure them with skepticism. Yet there was a steadiness to his voice, something that suggested he kept debts and crossed lines on a ledger only he understood. One of the men produced a blanket and draped it over her shoulders with the careful hands of someone who'd seen too much. Lena blinked back tears because she hated how quickly her body accepted charity and kindness. It felt like weakness, but it also felt like a recognition she had craved all her life. Minutes became an elastic thing. She lay on a cot while Kim Han Joon sat nearby, occupied with an old cigarette case he never opened. The lull in motion allowed her thoughts to rise like fish to the surface. She pictured the families who trusted him, the faces of the women who had sent their life savings. Her chest ached with a responsibility that was heavier than the bag she had clutched earlier. "Why help me?" she asked again, because the question would not leave her. "You don't owe me." He flicked his eyes to hers, brief and unflinching. "I help the people who stagger into my path when they have nowhere else to go," he said. "It's practical and not practical?" Lena asked. "It's also efficient." He tapped a finger against the paper he had folded and pocketed. "If you were exposed, this network would shift like a hive with its queen gone. That destabilizes the markets I touch. I keep the balance." Her laugh came out as a small, bitter sound. His logic was a machine, truer and colder than most morals. "You make the world run smoother by controlling the gears. The world runs however people allow it," he said. "I prefer to be the hand that guides the gears rather than the hand that waits for them to burn." She met his gaze. Studying the tattoos that peeked from beneath his collar, black inked lines like roots trailing into his chest. Up close, the etchings were finer, almost elegant, contradicting the brutality of his reputation. People loved contradictions, they feared them too. He was a walking paradox, gentle with the right people, lethal with the wrong ones. "You could have let me be crushed," she said finally. "For your own convenience." He made a small noise that might have been amusement. "Have you met men like my enemies?" he asked softly. "They savor cruelty, that takes time." "We don't have time tonight." The softness startled her, shattered whatever barrier she had set up between herself and the possibility that he might be an ally rather than a predator in a coat. Her mind drifted back to the first men who had chased her, to the sound of the shout that had started the whole night. She tried to picture their faces in context, to fit the pieces into a shape she could hold. "Do you want anything from me?" she asked. "Money, information." "Why keep me?" The questions came out raw because her life had always been about bargains she hadn't meant to make. He leaned back against the wall, the lamp cutting his profile into shadow and light. "Information can be useful," he allowed, then added, "but right now what I want is more simple." He paused, and the silence narrowed between them like a wire. "I want to know if you are someone I can trust to stand when it is most inconvenient to stand." She wanted to tell him that she had stood through mockery, through nights of hunger, through dismissive glances that carved at her skin until she bled. She wanted to tell him that she had been underestimated by everyone who thought softness equaled weakness, but her voice felt too small at that moment. Instead, she said, "I can stand." He looked at her for a long time. For a man whose life was built on motion, decisions, and the reality of being obeyed, stillness was not a weakness. It was a test, and he seemed to be measuring something she could not name. Outside the room, the men moved like ghosts, their murmurs melding into machinery. Once, Kim Han Joon turned his head sharply and barked an order in Korean. The command was crisp, no room for debate. The men obeyed without question. "You understand risk," he said to her. "And you understand exposure. That makes you dangerous in a city that thrives on cosmetic calm." "I don't want to be dangerous," she said. "I want to live. Dangerous people rarely get to choose safety," he replied. The bleakness of his remark would have hollowed out a lesser woman, but Lena had learned to carry life's small injustices like calluses. She tilted her head, thinking of all the times people had equated her size with complacency. pulling the curtain of invisibility across her until no one could see the work she did behind the scenes. She had picked at seams in corrupt accounts not because she sought fame, but because she believed, absently perhaps, that righting small injustices added up. "You could make me disappear," she said suddenly, because the thought had occurred to her and needed facing. "If you were of no use, you would already be gone," he replied, and the frankness in his voice made her flinch. "Usefulness keeps you alive. And so does discretion." She closed her eyes for a second, thinking of the file in his coat and the way her pulse had steadied beside his hand in the van. She felt the strange, odd tether of alliance stretching between two people who had no business trusting one another. In a city built on illusions, alliances sometimes formed out of necessity, like fragile bridges laid across a river where the current wanted to sweep everything away. When she opened her eyes, the room had taken on the slow cadence of night, all the noise compressed into a manageable hum. "If I help you," she said carefully, "what do I get?" "Survival," he answered without hesitating. "And a chance that what you exposed will be used to correct wrongs." "That's not a guarantee," she said. "No," he agreed. "Nothing in my line of work is a guarantee." Her shoulders drooped with a wary fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep. She let her hand rest on the blanket and for the first time in years allowed a tiny space for hope to creep in. It was dangerous and foolish and beautiful all at once. "I'll help," she said finally. Kim Han Joon's mouth twitched like the hint of a smile, an expression jarring on a face carved by discipline. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow, you meet with someone who can make sure your evidence does more than bruise the right man. Tonight, you sleep." She wanted to ask who he was sending her to, what obligations would be required of her, but the exhaustion won out. Her eyes closed and sleep, not restful, not peaceful, rolled over her like a reluctant tide. As she drifted, she thought of all the nights she had stood invisible in the back of rooms, of all the times her presence had been turned into a joke. She wondered if being noticed by a figure like Kim Han Joon was another form of erasure, another trade where she sold pieces of herself for protection. The line between saving and selling out felt paper-thin. She turned the thought over like a coin, feeling the worn edges. When she finally slept, it was with one hand over the blanket and the other curled near her heart, as if to keep a small, fragile piece of herself from being pulled away by easier hands. Morning arrived with sharp light slicing through the concrete slats, and the garage that had felt like a cage the night before now looked like a place that might hold answers. The city outside was waking, indifferent to the tiny revolutions that could topple a man or a life. Lena rose slowly, uncertainty coiling and uncoiling in her stomach like a live thing. Whatever came next, she had stepped over a threshold. There was no returning to the life that had been waiting like a frayed coat on a chair. By the time the sun rose higher, Lena had already learned that Kim Han Joon's protection came with invisible walls. Nobody in the underground garage spoke too loudly around him. Nobody interrupted. Nobody asked unnecessary questions. Even the air seemed to behave around him, as if the space itself had been trained to stay alert. She stood near a steel table while two men in dark suits spread the stolen papers in front of them. One of them spoke quickly in Korean, pointing to names, figures, dates, and coded transfers. The other man translated in clipped English. "There are money routes here," the translator said. "Several companies, charity fronts, shipping invoices, entertainment contracts." Lena folded her arms. "I told you, it wasn't just one man stealing, it was a whole system." Kim Han Joon leaned against the wall with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "How did you get into the office?" She looked at him. "They needed me to clean up after the gala. I was invisible enough to be trusted with the back rooms and too low to be watched." That made one of the men glance at her with open surprise. Kim Han Joon did not. "He only asked, and you understood what you were seeing." Lena lifted her chin. "I understand more than people think." That earned the smallest pause from him, not approval exactly. Something closer to interest. He pushed away from the wall and walked to the table, his tattooed hand resting lightly on the edge of the documents. "One weak point," he said, tapping a page, "can collapse a chain if it is exposed correctly. But if the wrong person handles this, the people in control will cover their tracks and disappear." She stared at the documents, the pages that had nearly gotten her killed. "Then we need to move fast." "We," he repeated, as if testing whether she understood the weight of the word. Her throat tightened. You said I'm useful. A short silence followed, then he nodded once. You are. The truth of that word sent a strange pulse through her chest. Useful. In another mouth it would have sounded like a leash. In his mouth it sounded like recognition. And recognition was dangerous because it made a woman hungry for more of it. One of the men brought coffee and placed a cup in front of her. Drink, he said gently. Lena hesitated, then wrapped her hands around the warm paper. The heat sank into her fingers. She had not realized how cold she still was until now. Kim Han Joon noticed, of course. He noticed everything. You should eat, he said. I'm not hungry. You are in shock. She almost argued, but he looked at her with a directness that made lying feel pointless. The truth was, her stomach had been in knots since the night before. Her mind was so full of danger that hunger had become background noise. One of the men left and returned with food in a sealed container. Lena looked at it suspiciously. Kim Han Joon's voice cut across the room. It's not poisoned. She glanced at him. That's exactly what someone poisoning me would say. For the first time, one corner of his mouth tipped upward. It was brief but unmistakable. The room noticed. So did she? Eat, he said again. She did. The food was simple, rice and vegetables and meat cut into small pieces, but it hit her in a place she had not expected. She realized, with a sharp sting in her throat, that she had not eaten properly the night before because she had been too busy surviving. Every bite felt like a tiny act of returning to herself. While she ate, Kim Han Joon listened to the translator explain the financial trail. Money moved from one shell company to another, then into property, private security, and favors hidden beneath luxury contracts. The name at the top of the chain belonged to the same man who had once laughed at her in front of the executive staff and called her background noise with a body. The memory flared hot. Humiliating and old, even though it had happened only days ago. Her fingers tightened around the container. Kim Han Joon caught the change in her expression. You know him personally, she nodded. He used to make jokes about me being too visible, too much woman. Too hard to fit into whatever image he liked. The translator looked away, uncomfortable. Kim Han Joon's face turned colder, though his voice remained controlled. And yet he trusted you around his files. Lena gave a sharp, humorless laugh. Men like that think they can control people by humiliating them first. And did it work? The question hit too close to the bone. She set the food down and looked at him steadily. Not anymore. There it was again, that small pause, that shift inside his attention. It felt like standing under a spotlight that had only just switched on. The room, the men, the table full of paper all seemed to recede for a second, while Kim Han Joon studied her like he was recalculating the shape of a problem. Good, he said quietly. Then we can work with that. It should have sounded cold. Instead, it sounded like a promise. The rest of the morning was a blur of phones, translated calls, and the sound of names being arranged into consequences. Lena was asked where she had seen the files, who had touched them, who had escorted her, who had noticed her. Each answer fed a larger map, one she could not fully see yet. But she understood enough to know the danger had not ended. The people behind the corruption were already trying to bury the evidence and anyone attached to it. At one point, a younger man with sharp eyes asked her, "Why risk your life for people who would never risk theirs for you?" The question sat in the air like smoke. Lena took her time before answering. Because somebody had to care, she said. Because if no one ever says enough, then the cruelty wins without even trying. The room went quiet. Kim Han Joon looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. He said nothing for several seconds, then turned back to the papers. But she felt the silence differently after that. It was no longer empty. It carried weight. Around midday, the garage door opened and another vehicle arrived. More men stepped out. This time they were dressed not in simple black, but in tailored coats and polished shoes. The kind of clothing that suggested they had money enough to ruin lives and power enough to make it seem accidental. At their center walked a woman with silver earrings and a face as calm as glass. She was introduced in Korean first, then in English as well. Ms. Choi. The room subtly rearranged itself around her. Lena noticed. Ms. Choi's eyes found Lena immediately, and the look was brisk, assessing, not cruel, but not warm either. She was the kind of woman who had learned to survive in male spaces by becoming sharper than the men who underestimated her. Lena respected that instantly. I need to speak with her alone, Miss Choi said. Kim Han Joon answered without hesitation. No, the single word landed hard. Ms. Choi did not flinch. You can't keep her hidden forever, Han Joon. Lena's head turned sharply. So even this woman knew how to speak to him like an equal, or at least like someone unafraid of him. Kim Han Joon's gaze darkened. I'm not hiding her. Then why does she look like she's one bad decision away from running again? Lena stiffened, partly because the woman had not been wrong. Kim Han Joon looked at Lena, then back at Ms. Choi. 5 minutes. 3, Ms. Choi replied. He said nothing, but the answer was visible in the way his jaw tightened. Still, he stepped aside. Ms. Choi motioned Lena toward a quieter corner of the room. You got brave in the wrong place, she said first. Lena frowned. That's a strange way to greet someone. It's the only way I know. Ms. Choi folded one arm across her middle. You have evidence against a man who is connected to several bad actors. That makes you useful to people who want justice and dangerous to people who prefer silence. Which one are you? Lena held her gaze. I'm tired of being silent. That answer seemed to satisfy her. Ms. Choi nodded once. Good, because this stops being about one corrupt man very quickly. I already know that. Do you? The older woman's eyes narrowed just enough to sharpen the question. Then understand this. If you keep standing near Han Joon, people will decide you belong to him. The words landed like a warning and a bruise all at once. Lena looked toward him before she could stop herself. He was speaking with one of his men, head lowered, expression hard, but the presence of him pulled the room toward his center. Ms. Choi noticed the glance. He protects what interests him, she said. Sometimes that is business, sometimes that is blood. Sometimes it is simply because he sees something others do not. Which is it with me? Lena asked before she could stop herself. Ms. Choi gave her a long look. That depends on whether you survive long enough to find out. The answer should have annoyed her. Instead, it made the back of her neck prickle. Before Lena could ask anything else, one of the men rushed in with a phone. He spoke rapidly, and every face in the room changed at once. Kim Han Joon took the phone. His expression did not shift much as he listened, but his eyes went sharp and dangerous. When he ended the call, the room had gone so quiet that Lena could hear the hum of the overhead light. What happened? She asked. He looked at her for a long beat. Someone leaked your name. The words hit her like a slap. They know where I am? Not exactly. His voice turned colder. But they know you were involved. A low curse came from one of the men. Lena's mouth went dry. Who leaked it? Someone close to the men you ran from, he said. Fear moved through her, quick and cold. She had hoped foolishly that this was about strategy and files and money. But once a name was exposed, a body followed. She crossed her arms around herself. So what now? Kim Han Joon took one step toward her. Now we move you before they find the door. She stared at him. You make that sound casual. It is not casual. He said it so flatly that she almost smiled, but the smile didn't come. What came instead was the realization that her life had shifted into a shape she no longer controlled. And somehow, impossibly, this man with tattoos and cold eyes had become the only fixed point in it. Ms. Choi cut in. There's another complication. Kim Han Joon looked at her. Speak, she handed him a second phone. The man who wants the file back is no longer the biggest threat. He's been contacted by someone higher. Who? Ms. Choi paused. Then she said the name. And the room changed again. Lena didn't understand the language exchange that followed, but she understood the atmosphere immediately. The name carried weight, the kind that made men go still and angry at the same time. Kim Han Joon's expression did not break, but the temperature around him dropped. When he finally turned back to Lena, his voice was lower than before. You're not just running from a corrupt executive, he said. You are standing in the middle of a war. Her skin went cold. A war was bigger than a bad man, bigger than a file, bigger than a single night of chasing and fear. It meant every step she took from this moment forward could become a trigger. And Kim Han Joon was looking at her like he had already decided she was part of the battlefield. Lena felt the words settle in her chest like a stone. A war meant there would be no clean exit, no simple handoff, no moment where she could hand over the evidence and walk away with her life untouched. She looked at Kim Han Joon and saw the answer in his face before he said it. He was already planning for her survival the way generals planned for supply lines, cold, exact, absolute. You should have told me sooner, she said, though the anger in her voice was thin under the fear. I told you enough, he replied. That's your version of comforting. He looked at her for a second, and something like restraint moved behind his eyes. You are still here. That answer irritated her more because it was true. She hated how quickly she had started to measure safety in his presence, how her nerves calmed when he stood between her and the open door. She hated that her body had begun to recognize him as a shield before her mind had decided he was trustworthy. Ms. Choi stepped in before the tension could sharpen further. If this name reaches the city's other side, then the people behind the corruption will not play quietly anymore. Then we hit first, Kim Han Joon said. That was the first time Lena heard his voice carry something close to fury. It was controlled, but it lived just beneath the surface, alive and dangerous. His men moved immediately, phones in hand, doors opening and closing, plans shifting from one corner of the room to another. She watched them prepare like a body preparing for impact. No one asked if she wanted to be included. That bothered her. So what's my role in this? She asked. Kim Han Joon turned to her. You stay alive, she stared. That is not a role. That is a command. It is the only one that matters right now. I don't need you to decide everything for me. The room stilled around them. One of his men looked up sharply, clearly surprised she had challenged him directly. Ms. Choi's face remained calm, though her eyes held a faint hint of approval. Kim Han Joon simply watched Lena as if she had just done exactly what he hoped she would do. Then he said, "Good." The single word startled her. He took one step closer, not invading her space, just enough to make sure she understood he was listening. If you want to help, then help properly. Tell me everything you remember, every face. Every voice, every room, everything they said when they thought you were not important. Lena's jaw tightened. Her whole life had been built around the exact opposite assumption, that she was not important, not sharp enough, not pretty enough in the way they preferred, not small enough, not quiet enough. The humiliation had taught her to notice everything in silence, to listen while they laughed, to collect details while they ignored her, so she did what he asked. She told them about the executive room, about the arguments she overheard through the wall, about the men who came and went in a pattern, about a woman in red who carried a briefcase no one else touched, about a ring on one of the men's hands stamped with a mark she hadn't recognized at first. As she spoke, the room shifted from vague tension into hard-edged purpose. Kim Han Joon listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at Ms. Choi. She noticed more than the others. Of course she did, Ms. Choi said. That's why she's dangerous. Lena frowned. I don't like that word. You should learn too, Ms. Choi replied. Dangerous women are harder to discard. The phrase lodged in Lena's mind. Dangerous women are harder to discard. She wanted to laugh, but the sound would have cracked into something too raw. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked away, trying to hide the emotion climbing into her throat. For years, people had talked about her body, her softness, her appearance as if it were evidence of her limitations. They assumed beauty was a narrow thing, and power belonged to smaller, sharper women who fit better into boardrooms and photographs. Yet here she was, standing in a room of men who feared the very information she had carried out in her hands. Kim Han Joon studied her for a moment and then said something in Korean to one of his men. The man immediately left. Moments later, he returned with a jacket, black and structured, clearly expensive, clearly chosen for protection rather than style. He offered it to her. Lena looked at it. What's this? A way to stop looking like prey, Kim Han Joon said, her brows shot up. I do not look like prey. He gave her a flat look. You ran through a kitchen exit with men chasing you and blood on the floor. That is exactly what prey looks like. She opened her mouth, then closed it again because, annoyingly, he wasn't wrong. The jacket felt heavy when she took it, but not in a bad way. It had the weight of something made for someone expected to move through danger. She slipped it on, and the fit changed the lines of her silhouette enough that she straightened unconsciously. Kim Han Joon noticed that too. His gaze lingered just a second too long, and she caught it. What? She asked. Nothing. That's never true when you say it like that. His mouth almost moved, almost became a smile, but he buried it. It suits you. The simple statement nearly derailed her. No one had said something like that to her in a long time, without making it sound like a joke or a strategy. She looked down, suddenly aware of the jacket's texture, the shape of the shoulders, the way it settled around her body without trying to erase her. It should not have mattered. But after years of being made to feel too big, too visible, too inconvenient, being clothed in something that suggested presence instead of concealment hit a quiet nerve. Ms. Choi watched the exchange and said nothing. Then the room's side door opened again, and a younger man came in too quickly, too breathless. He spoke in rapid Korean, and even without understanding the language, Lena heard the urgency in his voice. The atmosphere shifted hard. Kim Han Joon's eyes narrowed. "What?" Ms. Choi asked. The translator arrived at once, and his face drained of color as he repeated the message in English. "There's movement at the West Block. They found the dead courier." Lena's stomach dropped. Kim Han Joon's jaw flexed once. "And they traced the route back to the district office." Silence. Then very quietly, Ms. Choi said, "So it begins." Lena looked from face to face, trying to understand how quickly a city could turn. A dead courier meant escalation. A traced route meant questions. Questions meant people moving to cover themselves, to silence witnesses, to clean evidence. She had no trouble imagining the violence that followed once powerful men became afraid. Kim Han Joon was already issuing orders. A set of keys appeared. A map spread on the table. 2 men were assigned to the street, another 2 to the building's exits. His voice stayed level, but the room obeyed him with the speed of fear and trust combined. Lena watched all of it and felt something cold and strange form in her chest. He was not merely protecting her. He was preparing for her presence as if her survival mattered to his entire operation. That thought should have terrified her more than it did. Because it meant she was no longer just a witness. She was a piece on the board. "You need to move," he said to her. "Where? Another safe location. You keep saying safe like it's a real thing. It becomes real when enough people are willing to die for it." She stared at him. The words should have sounded dramatic, but in his mouth they sounded like the operating logic of his life. That made her wonder what kind of life he had lived to make death sound like a logistical detail. Ms. Choi stepped closer to Lena. "Listen carefully," she said. "If they connect you to Han Joon, they will use that connection to force his hand." Lena's chest tightened. "Why would my name matter that much, Ms.?" Choi's expression softened slightly, just enough to be read as honesty. "Because you are not supposed to exist in this part of the story." The phrase was strange enough to stun her. Not supposed to exist. Before she could ask what that meant, Kim Han Joon's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, and his expression hardened into something lethal. He ended the call with one clipped word and looked at Lena. "They've moved early," he said. "Who?" "The man you stole from and the one above him." Her hands curled into fists. "Then let's go." He stared at her for a beat. "You are serious." "Yes, you don't know what you're walking into. I know enough to be tired of hiding." That answered something in him. She saw it in the slight change of his posture, the tiny shift that happened when a person stopped asking permission to be brave. Kim Han Joon nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Then stay close," he said. The drive through the city was tense and fast, the windows darkened, the streets blurring with neon and rain. Lena sat in the back seat with a jacket buttoned over her clothes, looking out at a city that had never once made room for her. She used to think invisibility was her curse. Now it felt like something more complicated, a survival skill, one she had learned in rooms where no one expected her to be brilliant enough to notice their sins. Kim Han Joon sat beside her, one hand resting near his phone, the other relaxed at his side but ready. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 people moving toward something both of them understood might become irreversible. At a stoplight, he glanced at her. "Why are you staring?" she asked. "You are thinking too loudly." She laughed despite herself, then covered it with a sigh. "That doesn't even make sense." "It does to me." She shook her head, but the tension between her ribs loosened a fraction. That was the problem with him. He gave her fragments of warmth in the middle of danger, and those fragments were enough to make her forget how sharp his world was. The car turned into a quieter district, away from the flash of the downtown streets. Kim Han Joon guided them toward an unmarked building that looked, from outside, like an abandoned property. The place had no obvious guards, no obvious cameras, nothing that said power lived there. Lena knew better now than to trust appearances. They stepped inside to find polished floors, low lighting, and a wide room lined with glass and steel. It looked less like a hideout and more like a command center. A man she hadn't seen before stood waiting near the far wall. He was older, scarred, and unsmiling. He bowed slightly to Kim Han Joon, then looked at Lena with open curiosity. Her? He asked. Yes, Kim Han Joon said. The man's gaze flicked over her and then away. She does not look like much. Lena went very still. Before she could speak, Kim Han Joon's voice cut through the room like a blade. Say that again. The older man immediately lowered his head. I meant no disrespect. You did. The air in the room tightened with the force of that correction. Lena felt the heat rush to her face, partly anger, partly shock, partly the strange sting that came from being defended with such savage certainty. Kim Han Joon did not look at her when he spoke again. She is the reason you have a chance tonight. The older man's expression changed. Understood. Lena stood there, heart hammering, unable to fully process what had just happened. For years she had been dismissed with a smile, minimized with a joke, reduced with a shrug. Hearing a man of Kim Han Joon's power say that she mattered enough to alter the room was like feeling the floor tilt under her feet. He looked at her then. His eyes were calm, but there was something more behind them now. A recognition, maybe, or the beginning of one. And as the doors closed behind them, sealing the room from the city outside, Lena understood something she had not wanted to admit. Whatever this was becoming, it was no longer only about survival. It was beginning to feel like the start of a dangerous kind of becoming. Kim Han Joon did not let her stand in the command center for long before he motioned for her to follow him down a narrower corridor. Lena glanced once at the glass walls, at the screens glowing with routes and names and shifting points of danger, and realized the entire building was built to do one thing: turn chaos into control. That was what he did. That was what he was. He stopped at a private room and opened the door. Inside was quieter, almost painfully so. A single lamp glowed beside a low table. The room held no decoration, no softness, nothing that tried to comfort. It felt like a place built for decisions that would not be undone. Lena entered carefully, then turned to face him. You keep moving me like I'm a piece of cargo. He closed the door behind them. And yet you keep surviving. That's not the same thing. No, he said. It is better. The answer annoyed her enough to wake the anger under her fear. You really do talk like everything is a battle you've already won. His gaze settled on her, steady and unreadable. Because most battles are decided before people realize they're in them. She folded her arms. That is the most infuriating thing I've heard all day. For the first time, he let the smile show properly. It was small, but it changed his entire face. Less myth, more man. Lena caught herself staring. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Sit, he said, nodding toward the chair. She did, but only because she wanted to hear what came next. He remained standing, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the back of the chair across from her. His tattoos disappeared under the sleeve, but she could still see traces of ink near his wrist. The people after you, he said, will come looking for a person they think they can break. Lena lifted her chin. They'll be disappointed. His eyes flickered. Yes, the word felt like a quiet recognition. She looked away first, because if she kept meeting his gaze, she might start believing she was stronger than she felt. And that was dangerous in a way she had not yet learned to control. He continued, You are not being hidden here because you are weak. You are being hidden because power follows information, and information follows blood. She exhaled slowly. Do you always talk in warnings? Only when someone important is in danger. The sentence landed between them and stayed there, heavy and warm. Lena's pulse stuttered. Important. He had not said useful this time. He had not said convenient or necessary or strategic. He had said important. That single shift changed something she could feel but not yet name. She looked at him. And what am I supposed to do with that? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the table, picked up a thin folder and set it in front of her. What is this? She asked. Your way forward. She opened it slowly. Inside were copies of the evidence she had taken, the missing pieces she had only spoken about the day before, and a list of names she had never seen, but somehow recognized as the kind that moved through money, corruption, and fear. There were notes in the margins, arrows, circles, translations. Someone had built a case around what she had found, and they had done it quickly. Her breath caught. You did this overnight? He did not answer yes. He simply said, I told you I prefer efficiency. Lena looked up, stunned. Why? That question again, because every new thing he did only made the mystery deeper. Kim Han Joon's expression softened in a way that barely counted as soft. Because you deserve to be heard. The room went very still. No one had ever said that to her in a way that sounded complete. Not deserve to be heard, not worth the risk, not worth the trouble. Heard, full stop, as if her voice alone justified all the effort. She looked down at the folder because her eyes were suddenly hot. She had fought all her life to be seen in rooms that treated her like background. Her body, her presence, her softness, her weight, her blackness, all the things people had used to reduce her had become in this room. Simply part of the woman who had walked through fire with a file in her hand. Lena swallowed. I don't know what to say. You do not need to say anything, but she did. Because silence had been forced on her so many times that she could no longer bear it when someone handed her the truth without demands. You keep making this harder. That earned a real smile this time, short and dangerous. I know. Her laugh came out unexpectedly, broken and relieved at the same time. The sound startled her more than him. It felt good to laugh in a room where she had expected fear to own her entirely. Then the door outside opened hard. Both of them turned. A man rushed in, speaking quickly in Korean, his face pale. Kim Han Joon listened, then took the phone the man offered. Lena stood up immediately. What is it? She asked. He listened for several seconds, his face becoming even more unreadable. When he finally ended the call, the calm in the room had changed shape. It was not peace. It was a storm held under glass. They're here, he said. Who? He looked at her. The people who want you gone. Lena's lungs tightened. How close? Close enough. He moved fast then, all the quiet control from before becoming motion. He took her wrist and guided her toward the back of the room. Listen to me. Whatever happens next, do not leave this corridor until someone tells you the exact words. She stared at him. You're not coming with me? He paused just long enough to make her stomach twist. I have to stop the people who followed you. The sentence should have been enough. It was not. Her grip tightened on his sleeve. Kim Han Joon. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face. The room felt too small for the silence stretching between them. You're asking me to trust you, she said. I already asked that yesterday. And if I do, he held her gaze, then you will still be here when this ends. The certainty in that answer settled through her like a thread pulled taut. Lena hated that she believed him. Hated that she believed him more than she believed most promises she had ever heard. He released her wrist gently, which somehow made the moment feel more intimate than if he had held on tighter. Then he said, stay alive, and he left. Lena stood in the corridor for 1 second, then 2, listening to the low vibration of voices beyond the walls. Fear pressed at her ribs, but it no longer felt like the same fear from the night before. This one had edges. This one had direction. It was not simply terror. It was anticipation. She heard a sudden crash, then another, a distant shout. Her body moved before her mind had fully decided to. She ignored the instruction to stay put and crept toward the sound, stopping at a narrow opening where she could see into the adjoining hallway. 2 of Kim Han Joon's men had blocked the entrance. One was bleeding from the temple. The other was shouting into a radio. She caught glimpses of figures in the dark beyond them, men trying to push through, trying to force their way in before the doors could be sealed. And then she saw him, Kim Han Joon. He stepped into the hall with a stillness so severe it seemed to freeze the air around him. He was not shouting. He was not rushing. He was simply there, and the men trying to invade the building hesitated like predators suddenly aware of a larger one nearby. One of the attackers raised a gun. Kim Han Joon moved. It happened too fast for Lena to track cleanly. A blur of motion, a strike, the weapon knocked away. The man slammed into the wall with a force that shook the corridor. The others reacted, but the room had already changed. His men closed in from both sides. The attackers found themselves trapped in a collapsing shape of power. Lena covered her mouth without meaning to. She had known he was dangerous. She had heard the stories, seen the fear in other people's faces, watched the room bend around him. But seeing it with her own eyes was different. It was brutal and efficient and almost terrifyingly calm. He did not fight like a man trying to prove something. He fought like a man removing a problem. Then one of the attackers shouted her name. Her whole body went rigid. Kim Han Joon turned at once, his head snapping toward the sound, and in that second the attacker made a choice. He lunged toward the side corridor where Lena stood frozen behind the opening. He was fast, desperate, reckless. Lena stepped back too late. A hand caught her shoulder. She gasped, spinning hard, but the second she saw the stranger's face, she knew he was not one of Kim Han Joon's men. His grin was ugly, his eyes wild, his breath hot with intent. He had come for her. "Found you," he said. Lena drove her elbow back with every ounce of fear she had. Pain flared in her arm, but the man staggered. She twisted away, heart slamming, trying to run, but he grabbed the sleeve of the jacket Kim Han Joon had given her. The fabric tore. Then a gunshot cracked through the hall. The man jerked once and collapsed sideways. Lena stumbled backward in shock, her breath tearing in her throat. Kim Han Joon stood at the far end of the corridor, gun still raised, face unreadable. "You were told not to leave," he said. The reprimand in his voice barely hid the fear beneath it, and that was what undid her more than the gunshot did. Fear for her, not for the operation. Not for the plan, for her. She could not move. He crossed the hall and reached her in seconds, taking her face between his hands only long enough to check that she was intact. His touch was brief, precise, but the contact burned with an intensity that made her forget the shouting around them. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked down and saw the torn sleeve, a shallow scrape along her forearm. "I'm fine." He did not argue. He only took her wrist and pulled her behind him as the rest of the hall emptied into command and violence. More men were being restrained. The intruders were separated, disarmed, and dragged away. The building had survived the first breach, but only just. When the noise finally thinned, the corridor felt too silent. Kim Han Joon turned to her. His expression was composed again, but she could see the crack in the composure now that she knew where to look. "You don't listen well," he said. "You make it difficult." One corner of his mouth moved. "And yet you're still here," she swallowed. "Because you came back." The answer seemed to catch him by surprise. His eyes held hers for a long second, and in that pause Lena felt the room shift around them again. Not in fear this time, in something else. A realization. Whatever power had started this, whatever danger had pulled her into his orbit, something had changed now. She had seen him protect her with his own body. She had seen him cross a corridor under fire, because her name had been shouted by someone with murder in his voice. She had seen the world obey him, and she had also seen how much he noticed her, every bruise, every hesitation, every line of tension in her face. He stepped closer. Lena didn't back away. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "you will be seen." The words made no immediate sense. He continued, not hidden, not as a witness, not as someone in the background. "You will sit at the table where this began." Her pulse jumped. "Why?" "Because if they want to erase you, then they will have to do it in the light." The idea should have scared her. It did scare her. But beneath the fear was something fierce and electric and new. A seat at the table meant visibility. It meant power, or at least the beginning of it. It meant no longer being moved through rooms by others' decisions. And Kim Han Joon was looking at her like he intended to give her that chance. The corridor lights hummed overhead. Lena drew a deep breath and straightened the jacket on her shoulders. She had spent too long being told she was too much and not enough all at once. Too visible in some rooms, invisible in others. Too soft, too big, too easy to dismiss. Not anymore. She met his gaze with a steadiness that had not been there when the story began. "Then I'll sit there," she said. His eyes darkened slightly, approval, interest, something deeper than either. "Good." That one word carried them to the edge of everything, because she understood now that the story had changed. She was no longer a woman running from danger with a file in her hand. She was the woman who had survived the first attempt to silence her. The woman who had walked into the orbit of a Korean Mafia boss and refused to disappear. The woman who would be seen, whether the people at that table liked it or not. And somewhere beneath the tension, beneath the violence and the fear and the impossible new future, Kim Han Joon looked at her as if he already knew that the most dangerous thing in the room was no longer the gun, the money, or the men chasing her. It was her refusal to be erased.